We've run out of adjectives to describe how horrendous, abysmal the Kenny Payne era was in Louisville. 12 and 56, no, 12 and 52, 5 and 35 in the ACC. But guess what? It's behind us now. Pat Kelce comes in with a totally revamped roster, completely igniting this fan base. Christian and Nick here with Mike Rutherford of the Card Chronicle. Mike, tell us, how excited is everyone for to have a functioning human being as coach, and this really exciting roster that seems like they're going to play a fun style of basketball?
The best way I can put it, and I know it's like a sports radio, sports fandom cliche where you have like, we're not smart enough to compare sports to anything besides relationships. So we do that thing where it's like, oh, but I'm going to do that thing right here, right off the bat. It's like you've been in the most toxic, awful relationship in the entire world. Like they treat you like absolute crap every step of the way. And then when you get out of it, and you finally are ready to kind of get back into the waters and you find somebody new, if they do the bare minimum, it's like the greatest thing in the entire world. Like, oh my God, like he held the door for me. Like, oh my God, she didn't stab me with a fork. Like, she's the greatest person in the entire world. So Pat Kelce comes out here and you ask him a question about, explain your style of defense, explain what you want to do. And he goes into like some detail a little bit. We're like, oh my God, this is the great. I love this man. Like, make him the president of the United States right now. Let him ride in the Kentucky Derby, do whatever he wants to do. That's what Louisville fans have been dealing with for the last few months, because the Kenny Payne era, if you're a Louisville fan listening to this, I think you can back me up. He came up as a candidate in 2019. He came up as a candidate, obviously, again in 2022. And both times I sort of said, based on what I've heard from people I trust, they all say like this will be a disaster, and it will not go well at all. I laid out all the reasons why I was against it. When he finally got the job, I was like, I'll give him a clean slate. I'll hope for the best. It turns out disaster somehow wasn't even strong enough, because I've never seen anything like what we saw the last couple of years. And to be able to go into this with new energy and a guy who seems to really get the fan base and understand what this program is all about, people are extremely, extremely excited around here.
Yeah, if you don't know Pat Kelce and you're listening to this, you'll know him soon. He's just tenacious, energetic, just a great guy. And I mean, the guy's a winner, plain and simple. But let's talk about this person now. There's so many transfers. I'm not going to ask you all at once about all the guys, but what is the projected starting lineup for this season?
It's a great question. Kelce's been pretty coy about it since he got here. They played 2 games in the Bahamas, which I think gives you a little bit of an idea of what he's working with. I think there are only 3 guarantees, and that's Chucky Hepburn's going to start at the point guard position. You bring him over from Wisconsin. He's a 3-year starter at Wisconsin, has a lot of experience. He was a huge get for them a little bit later in the transfer portal recruiting process. I think him starting at the point is the only like real guarantee. Terrence Edwards Jr., who they brought over from James Madison, who actually beat Wisconsin in the NCAA tournament last year, I think will absolutely start. He can play the 2, the 3, or the 4. In this system, it doesn't really matter. I think he definitely will start. And then Kason Pryor, who came over from South Florida, was let's just call a spade a spade. He got a bag from Louisville. Like he was a big-time get in the NIL process. He was down to, everyone's like, oh, he's down to Arkansas or Alabama. And then boom, snap of a finger, he's going to Louisville. It's like, all right, we kind of know what happened there. They gave him what he wanted. He'll probably start at the 4. He can play the 5. The other 2 positions I think are a little bit up for grabs. In the Bahamas games, they started James Scott at the 5 at center, who comes over from Charleston. He's a guy that, played 18 minutes per game at Charleston last season, so you wouldn't think he would step into a gigantic role at Louisville in his first year, but they love him. They think he oozes NBA potential. His block ratio last season in limited minutes was outrageous. He's extremely athletic. If he can improve his offensive skill set a little bit, I think he can be a big-time player. I think that they'll start Javon Hadley from Colorado at the other spot. He's kind of this jack of all trades, junkyard dog, whatever cliche you want to use, just does all the little things. Tad Boyle loved him at Colorado. He was great in the 2 Bahamas games. I think that he'll start. They also really like Corin Johnson from Washington. Scoring Corin is a great kind of instant offense energy, but they like bringing him off the bench. He was the 6th man of the year last year in the Pac-12. I think, don't know, but think that Pat Kelce will keep him in that role this season. So if I had to guess, my 5 is Hepburn, Hadley, Edwards, Pryor, and Scott to start the season. But also wouldn't be surprised if they throw Noah Waterman from BYU in at the 5 and play him and Pryor together. I think they like that combination a lot. Two bigs that can really shoot it from the outside.
So many options, with this roster. A lot of guys who really thrive at sharing the basketball. A lot of guys averaging multiple assists per game coming in. Hadley's a guy that I saw you wrote that he's kind of become like a vocal leader of this team.
Yeah.
So that's something I would love to learn more about. But like Chucky Hepburn comes in from Wisconsin, shot 40% from deep his sophomore year, but that number dropped to 32. But he's a really competent. I think he can definitely get that number up. He's a guy that I think can really be a great forward general for them. Terrence Edwards from James Madison, obviously most known for that tournament performance where he was great. I think he'll definitely make an impact at scoring the basketball. And then Pryor, Nick and I were talking before the call about he was a zero at Boise for 2 years because he couldn't defend. But man, is he talented offensively. So kind of went a bunch of different directions there. But one, do you think Kayshawn Pryor's defense has taken a step, and is that something that's been a point of emphasis? And then two, is Javon Hadley that vocal leader for this group?
The case of Pryor defense thing it's interesting because when we first signed him, you're kind of doing a deep dive and figuring out what he does well and what he doesn't well. And when you watch him on film, he's sort of all over the place. He's taking a lot of chances. He's gambling. He gets beat a little bit because of that, but he's super active. And you talk to South Florida fans, and they're all like, this dude sucks on defense. Like he's not good defensively. Like, good luck with that. And then you look at the analytics, and like the advanced metrics love him defensively. I think Evan Miyakawa had him ranked as the best defender in the entire AAC last season, which is a little bit insane. So he defended well in the Bahamas. It's more of a system type deal. You can, they'll do the drop 5 thing where they'll put him at the 5 on defense and allow him to play towards the rim. He's a decent enough rim protector to, I think, be good in that role. And then it's like both offense and defense under Kelce are so system based that you can hide some weaknesses. As long as you understand where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing, you're going to be fine. I mean, you talked about guys that stood out and didn't stand out in the Bahamas. One of the crazy things was it was hard to pinpoint somebody who like really didn't play well or somebody who played exceptionally well because everyone just kind of understood where they were supposed to be. The ball was moving well. It didn't stop with anybody. They were just sharing it. It was one of those where it's like open man takes the shot, and they took a bunch of threes. They got to the rim. They rebounded really well on offense. So it was hard to be like, this guy was great or this guy was bad. It was just kind of like who shot well and who didn't shoot well. But I think Pryor defensively, I think he'll be fine. Javon Hadley, as far as being the vocal leader, yeah, when you've got a roster of 13 guys and 11 of them are playing this year, 2 guys are redshirting, they're all new. Like the only returnee from the program from last year is a walk-on Aiden McCool. So it's an entirely different culture. The good thing is you've got a lot of older guys. I think there are 6 players on this roster that are going to have exhausted their eligibility after the season. And you've got a lot of guys that are winners. You've got a lot of guys that have played in good programs. I mean, Hepburn at Wisconsin, Pryor, I know they didn't go to the tournament last year, but South Florida set a school record for wins. Colorado won a couple of games in the tournament. We got 3 guys over from Charleston, 2 guys over from BYU. Both those teams were in the tournament. So, I think it's kind of like a lead. You've got multiple leaders, but it sounds like Hadley's been the guy who's really stepped up and in the weight room in practice or whatever is really pushing everybody to be their best. And that's been cool to see because Louisville hasn't had a player like that the last few years. They've had some talented guys on those terrible teams, but they haven't had that just sort of like willing to get his nose dirty, first guy on the floor for a loose ball, is going to defend and talk crap while doing it, which I think is what Javon Hadley's going to do. He's a tough-nosed kid, and every good team in college basketball has a guy like that, and it's nice that Louisville finally has one again.
Yeah, you talk about just winning players, and there's so many good transfers from so many high major schools that they get all the headlines. But one guy that impressed me last season watching him, and he made a tournament of Long Beach State, was Abukar Traore. I mean, he's probably under the radar for a lot of people nationwide and Louisville fans. But I mean, the guy averaged 12, 8, and 5, and almost 2 blocks and 2 steals a game. Just a phenomenal athlete, good player. Do you think that he's going to have a good role this season, and could he be an X factor?
For sure. I mean, I think that they call him Cater is the nickname. They love him. Like the coaching staff absolutely loves this guy. They're doing the thing, practice just started across the country this week. They're doing the thing where the MVP from the prior week wears like a gold jersey in practice for that week. And the first player to get the gold jersey was Abukar Traore. He is insanely athletic. He put up ridiculous numbers when they did kind of like their their testing day at the beginning of the summer. And he was really good in the Bahamas as well. I think he's a guy. The one thing that he doesn't have that makes him a little bit, I don't want to say awkward fit, but they'll have to change the way they play offensively, is he's not an outside shooter. And in this system, Kelce wants at least 4 guys on the floor at all times that can knock down the three. He did a little bit of at Long Beach State, but for the most part, that's not the strength of his game. The good thing for him, though, is Kelce wants to crash 5 on the offensive glass. He's willing to give up transition opportunities on the other end in exchange for those second chance opportunities. And that's where Tror is. I mean, he's listed at 6'4". He plays like he's 6'10" because of those hops and that wingspan. He got a ton of offensive rebounds in the 2 games of the Bahamas. That was also a big part of his game at Long Beach State. And then he just defends the hell out of everybody. Like he is a super, super X factor on the team. I was talking about the starting lineup. I think there's a chance that he does crack that starting lineup. He started the second game in the Bahamas and played really well. Whether he's coming off the bench or starting, it doesn't really matter. I think you're going to see this team at Louisville have a bunch of guys that play between 18 and 24 minutes. Like I'm not saying they're going to do the platoon thing, but they've got 11 guys on this roster that all expect to play decent minutes. And I think they're all going to earn it. It's a super talented and super deep roster. So I don't think you're going to see anybody besides maybe Hepburn creep up there in like the I'm playing 30, 31, 32 minutes every single game type deal. And Tror is going to be one of those guys who I think you see right around 20 minutes, but has a very productive stat line every time he's out there.
Yeah, this roster definitely has the personnel to play Kelce style of a balanced team where people aren't playing huge minutes. And you mentioned the offensive rebounding, the stylistically that Kelce loves that. So 5 straight years they've been top 45. It was 4 straight years of top 20 before last year. So another kind of 2-part question. I love Noah Waterman. I was huge on BYU last year. I think he's fantastic. He's a matchup problem. He moves really well, and he can really. I think he's going to make it every time he shoots a 3. And I'm thinking about him, if it's him and Pryor out there at the same time, like guys with great length, but a little skinnier. And I guess my question is, in terms of the offensive rebounding philosophy, is that just more like everybody's crashing versus like some teams rank super high offensive rebounding percentage just because they have like a monster underneath who's just getting 4, like a guy who can have like a 5-6 offensive rebounding type game. Do you think there is a guy on this team who will be like a huge presence on the offensive glass, or is it more just like stylistically everyone's crashing? So, by committee, they'll get like 10 a game of multiple guys getting like 1 or 2.
Well, first of all, I love Noah Waterman too. He's been my favorite player to watch in the offseason because he comes over from, it's a big white dude named Noah from BYU who's like engaged. And so you see him and he's straight laced. And you see him, and you're like thinking one thing. He and Case and Pryor have a podcast together, and the first time they put out like a teaser for the podcast, he's like, "Hey, I'm here with my boy Case and Pryor, and like we're here." And I was like, "What the?" I was like, "Are you kidding?" I was like, "I did not expect you to talk like this." He's like, "What up, twin?" He's like, "What are we gonna talk about today?" And I was like, "Okay," I wasn't ready for this at all. He's hitting threes in the Bahamas, and he's doing like the gunsling to like the crowd and all this stuff. So I was like, "I love this guy." Plus, he's number 93, which is just hilarious. So I'm a Noah Waterman fan. BYU? He's 93 here. Their podcast is like Keep It 100 because he's number 93 and Pryor's number 7. So I'm a big fan. But I think his offensive rebounding philosophy is one of the things that I was a little bit, I don't want to say concerned about, but I looked at and I was like, it's one thing to do that at Charleston and Winthrop. It'll be another thing to try to do that here at Louisville when you're going up against better athletes. Their full schedule came out last night, and it's insane. Like it is a loaded schedule. They're probably going to play 7 at-large NCAA tournament teams in their first 11 games, so they need to really be able to hit the ground running. His philosophy is basically like, because they've also ranked near the bottom in transition defense for the last 5 years.
Figures.
And his philosophy is basically like, we feel like we'll make up more points with these second chance opportunities than we'll give up when we crash 5, don't get it, and give up a leak out. And that's great. I think you can do that, again, when you're playing in the Coastal Athletic Association or the Big South or wherever. In the ACC, you might have to alter that when you're going up against teams that rebound the ball better defensively because they're so big. But he does, we got a full taste of it. He wants to crash 5, and you've got, if you do come down with an offensive rebound, you've got two options. If you've got a wide open dunk it. If you don't, kick the ball out for a 3. Like he does not anybody who played basketball at a certain level heard a coach when you got an offensive rebound would just shout, go back up with it, go back up with it. He doesn't want that to happen. He's like, if there's a guy in good defensive position, what's different about you being in that spot with an offensive rebound than if we'd fed you in the post? There's bound to be 2 or 3 guys that are open with the defense being all shifted and out of position on the perimeter for a 3. So that's what we want to do. As far as Waterman and Pryor playing together and being a little bit lean, I do think it's one of the concerns when you look at this team. There's not a lot of beef inside. They're kind of brawniest traditional center is Frank Anselm-Ibe, who comes over after a couple of years at Syracuse and I think
Georgia.
Thank you. And he's the one guy on the roster who I think kind of understands that he's there to be he's the 11th man out of 11 guys. Scott's big-ish, but he's not ACC big. So they're going to play Indiana in their first game of the Battle for Atlantis. And that Indiana front line is like 6'8", 6'9", 6'10". And those are big dudes. And I do wonder how they're going to combat that. I think they're just going to have to outscore teams in that situation. They're going to have to be like 3 beats 2. And if we shoot the ball well from the outside, we got a shot. If we don't, then, you're going to beat us up inside. So that is definitely, I think, a concern when you look at this roster, just how they're going to combat teams with gigantic dudes inside that are used to playing kind of that traditional back to the basket type post basketball.
For sure. Yeah. I love Louisville. I guess, my one concern year one with Kelce is just continuity with just so many transfers coming in. I do think that can be remedied by Chucky Hepburn because he's been around forever and he's a really good point guard. But just some numbers, and this is turnover percent. Year one at Winthrop and year one at Charleston were both the worst of Kelce's tenure. At Charleston, he ranked 323rd in the country in turnover percent, and at Winthrop, he ranked 254th in turnover percent. So do you think continuity will be an issue early in the season, or do you think the Bahamas trip really helped out, and then having a guy like Chucky Hepburn obviously helps out?
So I was really concerned about that. I mean, for obvious reasons, you've got 13 new bodies, and it's just there's nobody left over. At the same time, you didn't want any continuity from what you've been dealing with the last couple of years. I think that what we saw from this team in the Bahamas really put those fears at ease. You had all these guys talking about, look, we've all played in similar systems before. Where we've been before, they've done elements of what we're doing here at Louisville. Plus, you've got a lot of guys that have just played a lot of big-time college basketball. They're like, we get along real well. It's cool that we got the NIL packages. It's cool that we are getting some attention. But for a lot of these guys, this is their last year, and they want to win. I mentioned all the guys that have played in the NCAA tournament. None of them made it past the first weekend this past year. I think you had 10 of the 13 scholarship players on Louisville's roster were in the tournament a year ago. None of them won multiple games besides Colorado, which was in the first 4, so they didn't make the Sweet 16 either. Like, all these guys are hungry not just to get to the tournament, but to play deep. And I think that they've fully bought in. Like I said, watching this team, I know the competition was what it was in the Bahamas. They played a team from Canada and a group of Bahamas All-Stars. So it was what it was. But the willingness to share the ball, the understanding of where you're supposed to be, it was all so far ahead of schedule that it was impossible not to watch that, whether you were a Louisville fan or not, and be impressed with it. I talked with Rob Doster, was down there calling the games, he and Terrence Oglesby, and they both were like, look, we've got no stake in this. We don't have any ties to Louisville, but watching this team play, much, much higher on them now than we were if we hadn't been down here watching this. Like, I think you've just got a bunch of mature guys that know how to play basketball and that are fully bought into making this the most successful season they possibly can. And that does alleviate some of the lack of continuity and the lack of team chemistry. It seems like just everybody's on the same page, which is great to see.
And Nick, you bring up that first year kind of being difficult at Charleston Winthrop, but then he quickly just turned it around and turned them into winning programs at the top of their leagues. But the luxury as at Louisville now is because of the NIL money, because of the brand, it doesn't, maybe you can kind of skip that step of that first rough year because the talent level is just at another level instantly. So a lot to be excited about this Louisville roster. I think they're going to be really fun to watch. They're obviously going to shoot a ton of threes. They got a lot of guys who can play make. I think it's going to be a really unselfish team. You talk about a guy like Hadley and, older guys, just tough winners. A lot to like. I guess last thing, this freshman, Connie Ruths, do you think he will factor in at all? And then also, we didn't really talk about Rain Smith. He's a guy that started for 3 years. Like, is there any, he's obviously coming to the situation knowing that there's a lot more talent around him than there was at Charleston. So is he cool with kind of being like a backup point guard on this team? And then, is Ruths a guy that you think can factor in here?
Yeah, I think Rain Smith, everybody he didn't shoot the ball insanely well in the 2 exhibition games, but everybody on that team is like, he's the best shooter I've ever seen. And he's done enough at Charleston to I think earn the reputation of being one of the better shooters in college basketball. I think he'll be a guy where it's kind of matchup dependent. Like he goes out there, he'll probably have a game where he hits like 9 threes and scores 27 points. And then the next night he scores, 5 or 6 points. I think that's going to be the case with a lot of these guys. But he seems to, he's there because of Pat Kelce. He forged a great relationship with Kelce and the rest of the assistants who Kelce also brought over from Charleston, and understands what he's supposed to be doing. He's a team first guy. And I'm sure it'll be hard for him going from being he's a freshman starter on some really good teams at Charleston to being more of a backup here. But he seems like he's a mature kid who's willing to do all that. Kenai Roos is a kid who, Louisville, if you look at just recruiting rankings, he's like the 11th highest ranked recruit that Louisville's ever signed since in like the network scouting era. And he's kind of, I don't want to say it's an afterthought, but because of what they went out and got in the transfer portal, he hasn't been talked about as much as he would have if this were like 5 years ago. He looked really good in the Bahamas too. And I know he's a guy that they're very excited about. And I do think that, Louisville's got a lot of guys that are going to age out of college basketball after this season. So they will probably be portal heavy again next year. But at some point, Pat Kelce wants to get this into a situation where they are prioritizing roster retention. They are prioritizing having that culture carry over from one season to the next, and getting a guy like Kenai Roos who can come in here, contribute as a freshman, and then hopefully develop over the course of his sophomore, junior seasons before he maybe goes pro, I think is a big deal. And like, he shot the ball really well. He didn't stand out as a freshman playing with 23, 24-year-old men out there. He seemed to be in the right positions. He seemed to know where the ball was supposed to go and got it there quickly and effectively. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about Kenai Roos. I don't think he starts, but I do think he's another one of those guys who plays like probably 18, 20 minutes a game and has a couple of nights there where he's really, a guy that helps you win big time games. He's very athletic. He's super talented. They're excited about him. They're excited about all these guys. Like, you point to this roster, and I think all these dudes can play. They didn't just take any fillers to come in and say, well, here's your 13th scholarship. Even the guys that are sitting out, I think are guys, Ali Khalifa from BYU and Kobe Rogers from Charleston, that are going to help this team significantly next season when they're eligible to go. So, yeah, they spent the NIL money well, for sure.
Last thing, I'm happy you brought him up. You won't find a bigger fan of the Egyptian magician than this guy right here. Sad that he can't play this year, that he'll be redshirting. Can you update us on his injury process and just his spirit of his level of engagement around the group as a guy who can't really play right now? Love the way he plays the game. I think he's awesome.
They're very excited about Ali Khalifa. He had surgery, I think, 3 weeks ago. He'd been working out, kind of like doing minimal activities during practice during the summer sessions with the team before he had the surgery. Now he's just sort of sitting out and doing lifts. I loved they had media day a couple of days ago. And so he and Kobe Rogers, who was great for Charleston down the stretch last season and who they think can be a really good player for them next year, they're both sitting out this year. And they took all these pictures together. They recreated the Step Brothers movie poster where they're both like staring off in the distance with one another. They did one where like Kobe Rogers was dunking on Ali Khalifa holding a basket, like a fake basket, and Aiden McCool, the walk-on, was like, I can't believe my mind in the background. So they're having fun with their time off. And I think that they're going to be two guys that really endear themselves to the fan base with the way that they've handled this. But yeah, Ali Khalifa he seems perfect for this offense, the big man who can be out there and can be a pick and pop threat, but also really knows how to distribute the basketball and is a terrific passer. I think he'll help the team immensely when he's eligible next season. You also have this weird thing where Ali Khalifa and Noah Waterman both come over from BYU after the BYU head coach goes to Kentucky to be the head coach there. And like Louisville fans are like, oh, we took your best players. And Kentucky fans are like, we didn't want him anyway. So you already have the rivalry never stops around here, even when it's something as simple as that. So I think both those guys rejecting Mark Pope and choosing to come play for Louisville has the fan base very excited about both of them.
Well, a year after, Calipari's got multiple top 10 picks on his roster and Louisville's being coached by Kenny Payne, to say that months later that Louisville might be a better team is something that I don't think many people would have imagined. But Mike, you were an awesome guest. You had me laughing a lot of times throughout this, especially with the podcast of 937 and the Noah Waterman story. So thank you so much for joining us. Hope you enjoy a year of your blood pressure just being a little bit more relaxed and having a guy who will actually talk to you in press conferences and win some basketball games. So hope it's a fun year down in Louisville.
It feels good to feel normal again, folks. We're very excited. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Awesome.